your power change, your influence change, and all these things. Hopefully you could use them in a positive way where you and your team could benefit from it.
Did Meek Mill decide to stop fighting with his old friend Rick Ross? People are wondering about that. Maybe the deal he made with MMG, Maybach Music Group, is still causing trouble. We're all curious. Also, what is Meek Mill doing with Dreamchasers Records now? Did he make a deal with Jay-Z to show Rick Ross not to mess with him? That could be the case. But before we talk about that, let's go back and see what's happening between Rick Ross and Meek Mill. We need to understand how things got to this point. The reason why Rick Ross and Meek Mill started fighting probably has to do with losing money over a record label contract. There might be other reasons, but this is likely the biggest one. So, what happened exactly? When there are albums being made, there's money involved. Meek Mill first got a record deal with T.I.'s Grand Hustle, but they didn't make an album together because Meek spent 7 months in prison. They split up in 2010. But then, in February 2011, everything changed when Rick Ross signed Meek Mill to his record label. Meek Mill signed a contract with a label called Maybach Music Group, run by Rick Ross. He made all 5 of his albums while with MMG. But things didn't stay good for long. Last year, Meek started talking on Twitter about his money problems. He tweeted several times about not getting paid for his music and not knowing how much money the label was making off him. He said he needed lawyers right away. Then, he even threatened to make his contract public. Ask the record label, how much have you spent on me as an artist? Then you ask, how much have you made off of me as an artist? I'm about to make my record deal public by Monday. Just let the world see what these people are. Meek Mill is signed to Atlantic, MMG, and Roc Nation, so it wasn't clear who he was upset with. Rick Ross had something to say about it. He still thinks he's friends with Meek. Rick Ross believes Meek was talking about Atlantic Records when he tweeted. In an interview with The Morning Hustle, Rick Ross said this.
When Meek taking a jab at anybody, the only way I can assume is he doing that at Atlantic Records. All we ever did was get paper, and it's real easy to say a nigga name.
Here, Rick is trying to say that Meek has a problem with Atlantic Records, not MMG. That actually seems to make sense. A few weeks later, Meek got back on Twitter, but this time it was clear who he was dissing. In one of his tweets, he said something that made it obvious. Look, I made Atlantic Records hundreds of millions, and let them me out Radia artist they came to me about in jail. They still saying I can't drop music until 9 months after my last album got blackballed. Just rap buildings and Nina art with talent. To put it even simpler, Meek Mill directly called out Rick Ross in a tweet on the same day. He said that the label, probably Atlantic Records, split them up as soon as the money came in. He also mentioned that the same thing happened to him and Rick Ross. For those who don't know, Meek had tried to sign Roddy Ricch before Atlantic Records did and took him from Dreamchasers, Meek's own record label. This happens a lot in the music industry. As soon as someone becomes successful, the big companies come in and make them offers they can't say no to. Some of Meek's fans might not know about this. To put it even simpler, Meek Mill directly called out Rick Ross in a tweet on the same day. He said that the label, probably Atlantic Records, split them up as soon as the money came in. He also mentioned that the same thing happened to him and Rick Ross. For those who don't know, Meek had tried to sign Roddy Ricch before Atlantic Records did and took him from Dreamchasers, Meek's own record label. This happens a lot in the music industry. As soon as someone becomes successful, the big companies come in and make them offers they can't say no to. Some of Meek's fans might not know about this. Meek wants some space between him and Rick. Maybe he wants out of both Atlantic and MMG. It seems like Meek Mill has had enough of being taken advantage of and is thinking about going independent or changing his contracts. Now, let's talk about Meek Mill's record label. On October 26, 2012, Meek Mill announced the start of his own record label, called Dreamchasers Records. But it's not just him doing it alone. He made a deal with Jay-Z's Roc Nation. So, what's happening with Dreamchasers? Who's in charge? Well, it's a partnership with Roc Nation, but Meek has the freedom to sign artists and control the creative side of making music. Meek has the freedom to do his own marketing, but he's still under contract with Atlantic, which he doesn't like. Until that contract ends, he'll have a lot of worries. If one day Meek can end his contracts with MMG and Atlantic and make Dreamchasers big, it would be a big blow to Rick Ross, who was not just a friend but also a mentor. Remember, Rick Ross played a big part in Meek's success in hip-hop. Some think Meek should leave his deals with Roc Nation and Atlantic and go back to being close to Rick Ross.